Today, I am going to give a talk on the paramita of patience. I'm giving a series of 6 talks on the 6 paramitas, or the 6 transcendent virtues. It's good to use the English. And patience sometimes is the word forbearance and also tolerance. All 3 of them are used in relationship with this paramita. And my talk, I am prepared for it by studying Dharma Paths by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, specifically pages 154 to 174. And in Dharma Paths, he talks about each of the 6 transcendent virtues. And he spends the most time on patience in terms of the number of pages that is devoted to this particular paramita. And the book is basically transcribed talks of his that he gave. So he obviously stressed this transcendent virtue more than the others. And I assume that means because he felt it was so important for the world today, and perhaps specifically America, as he at that time was teaching primarily Americans. So the perfection of patience is transformative. It transforms difficult situations and circumstances into spiritual benefit. And of course, it transforms the practitioner as well. So here is a quote. Patience doesn't mean simply tolerating our suffering and the suffering of others, but it means working to eliminate suffering through the practice of Dharma. And so he really stresses practice in this chapter on patience. He starts by talking about patience in everyday life, and then he talks about patience in our practice of the Dharma, and he finishes it up with talking about patience with difficult people and difficult situations in our life. So getting back to the patience in everyday life, he says that the practice of Dharma is a way of life, that don't lead a double life, and that is sometimes have a dharmic life, and then there is the rest of your life, which is basically divorced from your dharmic life when you get on in a samsaric way, pretty much oblivious to the Dharma. It would be, for instance, being very nice to people at work, accommodating, and so forth. And then when you get home at night after work, you're so frustrated from having to be nice all day long that you start yelling at your wife or your kids or beating your dog. This is not the way to have a transformative experience. So we all have goals that we want to accomplish. And it's really important for our goals to be based in the Dharma. And the benefit of Dharma and the practice of Dharma is that it helps us see what's trivial and what is unimportant, where we need to spend our time and where we can just let go of other things and not get so concerned about them. This is actually a sign of being able to manage your life well, being able to discard what is unimportant. And with the study and practice of Dharma, the way it affects our ordinary life is that moderation becomes a more important factor, that we can apply wisdom to our daily lives and our activities. We start to see that without patience, our worldly activities become distracted, that we get bored, we get overwhelmed with emotions, we get irritated, and so forth. And then we go on to something else. Or we finish what we were doing in a way that we really didn't do the job very well. Or you find that you have too many things to do. And when you finish, you just take on even more activities and just keep piling on activities and so forth, and busy, 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 busy. And then you never seem to have any time. Actually, it's a way of running away from life. And you go way beyond what is necessary and what is reasonable. So this is, again, where wisdom comes in, is that we can look at our lives and look at what you might say, have on our table already, decide what is important and what is unimportant, spend our time doing the things that are important. And then if we have extra time or free time, we can take on the things that aren't so important. And this can help us reduce stress, discord, unhappiness, and all kinds of other things. We actually become more successful at our mundane, worldly activities. So the next point is patience in the practice of Dharma. And the goal of practice is, of course, to develop qualities and reduce our faults. And underlying the whole thing is to reduce our suffering and increase our happiness. Well, patience is essential in this goal. As Dharma is the remedy for suffering. That's the first. The noble truth is the truth of suffering, and the second is the cause of suffering. The third is that suffering can cease. And the fourth is there's a path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So this is really important, that the Dharma is the remedy for suffering, and that we need to hear the teachings. We need to contemplate how they relate to our life and understand them and practice them, to take them into our experience so that they are not some abstract conceptualizations, to something that we can relate to in a very intimate way. And we need to practice without giving up, without falling into despair. It's easy to want quick fixes. And Dharma usually is not a quick fix. It's something that takes time and effort, devotion, and so forth. You get out of it what you put into it, but you have to put into it a lot of effort, confidence, faith, and so forth. So with practice, we need to have tolerance and forbearance, and including when things get difficult, not giving up, because they can get difficult. Thinking that I am just having such a bad day that I can't practice, or that I'm feeling sick and I can't practice. I can't get out of bed, and so forth. Well, you can do mantra practice with a mala while you're lying down in bed. Without falling into despair. When we practice, we actually start seeing ourselves more clearly. And sometimes that clarity causes a practitioner to get very hard on themselves when they see all their faults. And thinking like, oh, I'm just plain bad. I could never really change. We're trying to turn a lump of coal into a white whatever. So we need patience until we start having a direct experience of the meaning of the teachings. Patience is what keeps us from not giving up. Rinpoche says that patience is required for the physical work. And for those of you that have at least started Nundro, you know what I'm talking about and what he's talking about. And that is that one aspect of Nundro is very physical. It's these prostrations. And when you're doing the prostrations, there's a good chance that you're going to be sweating and you're going to be physically tired at the end of a session and so forth. And it's having patience to endure this, realizing that you are doing this for your own benefit and development. And there's mental work that needs to be done. Meditation is not just sitting and becoming blissed out, it's work. And if you have a regular meditation practice, it requires patience to sit for the entire session that you've committed yourself to and come back the next day and do it again. There are other things that are required. And one is travel. Like sometimes it might be travel to New York, to the monastery outside of Woodstock. It might be, I have traveled to Madison to attend a program by the Dalai Lama, or traveled to Chicago to hear a teaching Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche gave there. Or now I live outside of Minneapolis by an hour and a half, and when Minneapolis would invite Rinpoche or Bardatulku Rinpoche, I would go and visit their center to that teaching. or go to the Twin Cities for other teachings that teachers would give. Karmapa has been to Minneapolis, or travel somewhere else to do a retreat, and so on. That this was a surprise to me when I first got involved in Tibetan Buddhism, is that it involves travel. And then, of course, along with the travel and the retreat come expenses. So we are required to do a lot of things, to give a lot. It costs money, time, effort, and so forth. And patience and diligence are really important here. I'll talk about diligence my next talk, because that's another one of the transcendent virtues, but very simply, diligence is joyful exertion. So it is being patient, but also with a feeling of joy and wanting to continue. Not just, oh, I can last this out. Kind of recognizing that practice is the most beneficial thing that you can do. So, as I said, we need personal experience to know the meaning of the words and then apply them to our lives and to benefit others. And to get that personal experience, we have to do the work. There are plenty of examples of great masters in the past. People like Milarepa, Marpa, Gampopa, the Karmapas. I'm leading a book class, and we are studying at the present time the In Love with the World by Mingyur Rinpoche. And in there, he talks about embarking on a solitary wandering retreat in India. And again, it requires endurance, patience, and diligence. And he is a great example of a living master and how much he was willing to endure in order to progress on the path. So it's really good to study the biographies of these great masters to help encourage us to follow their example. The biographies, the Tibetan word that is used is namtar, and it literally means example. So these biographies are meant to inspire us to have their devotion, their confidence, their trust, their patience, and being willing to put in the time and effort to accomplish the goal. Rinpoche says on 160, quote, "Without sincere, correct, and diligent practice, it is not of much practical use to simply witness certain sessions of teachings or study the teachings for a short time in an intellectual way." So we need to make use of these teachings. This is really important. He uses the word endurance. And in this chapter, he keeps referring to Milarepa. And just to say a little bit about Milarepa is that he came to Marpa looking for a teacher to help him purify the karma that he had accumulated from killing 35 people. And Marpa made it very, very difficult for him to receive teachings. He put him through all kinds of ordeals that were very, very physically demanding, mentally demanding, and so forth. But eventually, through his perseverance, his patience, you could even say desperation of wanting the teachings and wanting to avoid falling into the lower realms when his present life ended, he kept following Marpa's instructions. And eventually, Marpa did give him the teachings, and it is described as like a pitcher of water being poured into a glass, that Milarepa received the teachings, he understood them, and through practice, he quickly realized them. And he spent the rest of his life as a wandering yogi with little to no possessions, wandering around Tibet. And he was happy to have that lifestyle. It's interesting that in our family lives, our mundane lives, our work lives, that we have physical difficulties. We have financial difficulties. We have work difficulties, relationship problems, family problems. We have doubt. Our car sometimes breaks down, and so forth. And if we work with them patiently, we can resolve those differences. And it is the same way with Dharma practice. In the case of Dharma practice, we need the motivation to be of more benefit to others in the future. A feeling of, I wish I could be more benefit than I am now. And then have confidence in the practice of Dharma. Confidence that it is the practice of Dharma that will help us achieve that goal of being of more benefit to others. Finally, it's really important to have confidence and understand that we have Buddha nature, that we don't have to get something that we are lacking from somewhere else. What we're really doing with practice is uncovering our Buddha nature. It has always been there. We just have not realized it. So to sum up this section, we can face obstacles, difficulties, and so forth. We can work with them and we can transform them into progress. That obstacles can be seen as opportunities. I sometimes use the phrase, stumbling blocks can turn into stepping stones. The last topic here in his chapter on patience is patience with those who cause harm. And this is extremely important. And I would say it is even more important today in the present environment in the United States today, and perhaps the world today, because there is a lot of anger, animosity, resentment and so forth. So this covers people who directly harm us or disturb us or direct others to cause us disturbance and harm and difficulties and so forth. Now, patience here means that we're not motivated to take revenge with our body, our speech, or plot revenge or have ill will with our mind. And I'm going to add this, and that is that today we have social media, which did not exist when Rinpoche gave this talk, which probably would have been about 1988, 89, 87, somewhere in there. But social media, it's so immediate that if someone posts something and it upsets you, it's so tempting to immediately respond to it in some way. You're hot-headed, you're angry, you're resentful, you disagree with them, da, 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 da. And so you post something. And even people that have nothing to do with Buddhism have had to admit recently that I regret having made that post. And so it's really important to be able to, you might say, get a handle on our impulses towards resentment, anger, aggression, and so forth. And so Rinpoche says to contemplate these two things. The first is the benefits of the practice of patience. Remember, you can change, and that it is in your best interests to change. The troublemaker is completely confused. They are not having a good day. They are having a bad day. In fact, they might even be having a bad week, a bad year, perhaps a bad lifetime. And that by you responding in kind, you're just creating more negative karma and more suffering for them as well as yourself. And meditate about this. What is the benefit from retaliating? Rinpoche says to meditate on the equality of self and other to help with this. That the troublemaker is no worse than you, no lower than you, and you are no higher than the troublemaker. You both have Buddha nature. You both want to be happy. You both want to be free of suffering. The troublemaker is confused, and he thinks that what he's doing or what she is doing will cause them happiness. And of course, that will never work, but they're confused. So Rinpoche says, quote, if we try to protect ourselves from suffering and confusion, we should also be responsible for not causing harm to others. So there is this idea of being responsible for not causing harm. The second point is the shortcomings of aggression. And there are two types. There's hot anger, which is when people have a temper tantrum, you might say. They blow up. Perhaps their face gets red. They say words that are hurtful, and so forth. The other type of anger is cold anger. And that is not so obvious, where the anger is kept bottled up and revenge is plotted, thinking about how to get even. So it's important to recognize that both of those are forms of anger and aggression. And aggression and anger are like eating rat poison and expecting the rat to die. That they harm the person that is angry more than the person that they are angry at, directing the anger towards. It's really good to examine yourself, if not when you're angry, because it's really difficult as anger just completely takes over your mind. Then after you have been angry, kind of do a post-mortem, look into it. How did I feel when I was angry? Was I happy? How did my body feel? Was I comfortable? What was going on in my mind when I was angry? Was I happy? Can I enjoy a meal when I'm angry? Can I enjoy anything when I'm angry? And if you do feel happy after getting angry at somebody, how long does that happiness last? Angry people have trouble sleeping at night. So it's important to think about these things and contemplate them and examine yourself. Think about when I am angry around my friends and family. Do you care about them when you're angry? Do you think they are happy to be around you when you're angry? If you look at the effect of anger on other people, you will eventually come to see that anger is very, very destructive of relationships. It's important to investigate our angry outbursts. Ask questions like, what is the reason for this outburst? And when you come up with a superficial answer, then look deeper and ask the question again. Look at the question, how often do I eventually regret being angry? Not going out and telling somebody that you regret being angry at them, but just regret to yourself being angry. People do not enjoy being with angry people. we can get extremely angry about what a person says to us, but it doesn't make us who we are, that we are well beyond other people making us into somebody that we are not. That in the relative world, we basically make ourselves who we are. We still are confused human beings, but hopefully we are following the Buddhist path and practicing and trying to improve that, who we are in the relative world. When you practice patience around an angry person, Rinpoche feels they will eventually, it might take a long time, come to respect you for not striking back, retaliating, and so forth. And we, as responsible Buddhists, we learn to accept our faults and limitations and try to avoid projecting them on someone else, which is extremely common. This problem is that we think others are responsible for what we do not want to deal with within ourselves. We go around blaming other people, whereas in fact, when we look within, we can find that the problem is our own confused mind. So it's good to contemplate the benefits of patience and the shortcomings of aggression. Rinpoche says that aggression produces blindness, that we see others' faults and we never see our own faults. It's always somebody else. It can easily get to the point where we feel that others are against us, deceiving us, plotting against us. When in fact, the problem is within. It is the way we are viewing others and viewing the world. So it's important to remember our minds are flexible, that thinking that I cannot change, it comes from ignorance, and it involves very flimsy excuses. When it gets right down to it, our minds are very flexible, very changeable, and it requires a lot of effort to avoid changing and being flexible. Now, some people want to make you angry. This is another important point. Rinpoche doesn't mention this in his book, but I think, again, this is very important. And this is about what would now be called a troll on the internet. But there are trolls out here in real life. It isn't something that just developed since the internet developed and social media developed. And I'm using troll here as a person that wants to make you angry. That is what they are trying to accomplish. And for whatever the motivation is, I'm not going to go into an analysis, but it's very common in politics today. Very common on the internet, wanting to get other people to get angry, blow up, and make a fool of themselves. And my own personal experience of this was when I was working as a prison chaplain. And one Sunday, the Protestant volunteer group did not show up for the Sunday service, which was regular, and I decided that I would lead the service rather than cancel it. And as a prison chaplain, of course, I'm authorized to do that. And I grew up in the Lutheran denomination and spent a lot of time in church as a child throughout my teenage years. So quite familiar with Christianity. And even when I was in college, my first 2 years, I went to a regular church service. So I led the service. It went well. The next day, an inmate came into my office and he said, "You have no right leading a Christian service. You're a Buddhist monk." And I said, "Yes, I do," and a few other words. And he said, "No, you don't," and quite a few other words. And I said, "Yes, I do," yada, yada, yada. He said, "No, you don't," yada, yada, yada. Finally, I got angry and I yelled at him and I said, "Get out." And he was in my office and he immediately stood up, walked towards the door. When he got to the door, he opened it, turned around, looked at me, pointed at me and said, "Gotcha," and left. That's what I'm talking about, trolls. And so if they can control your emotions, they can control you. And this is really important. Not only are they making your life miserable because you can't control your emotions, but they're actually taking over control of your emotions. And patience is really important here. And I felt that inmate was an extremely valuable teacher. I never fell for that trick again in prison. I hope I don't on the outside either. I'm not saying that I'm impervious, but I'm much more aware of it. And I want all of you to be aware of this too, because this is rampant right now in the United States and in the world in general. So it's really important to make a commitment to develop patience and to not turn back. Keep that commitment. Commitments are really very, very important. If you just say, "Well, yeah, I'll practice it when I have time and when I'm feeling good," and yada, 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 that's not a commitment and it won't get you very far. Now, there are 5 other perfections, and they are all interrelated. And so I'm going to bring them up briefly here to show how they're interrelated with patience. Diligence is exertion, persistence coupled with joy. And so we need that with our patience, so that we have a feeling of energized joy doing practice and being patient. Discipline is being firm in our commitment to benefit self and others, avoiding harming ourselves and others. This keeps us on track. And again, this is important for discipline, for patience, to maintain our discipline. Meditation or mindfulness is paying attention to what's going on in your mind, paying attention to how anger arises, seeing when it is just beginning to arise and applying a remedy before it gets any stronger. Or if it has arisen, then going back and investigating it and looking at where did it arise first, what set me off, what pushed my buttons, and getting to know the anger, make friends with the anger. Wisdom is understanding that words are just wind against vocal cords, that they really have no essential nature. As soon as they are out, they are gone unless you hold on to them. And finally, generosity, which is this first one, and I'm listing it last here, that you are practicing patience as a gift to benefit others. And to finish up this section, there are techniques that can be used to develop patience. The first is a regular meditation practice, coupled with checking in with the meditation instructor occasionally to make sure that you are practicing properly and have not developed any bad habits. This will help you get the most out of the practice. The second is that resolve with a sense of mindfulness that today, no matter what comes my way, I will not let them bother me or let them overwhelm me. Again, this is this commitment that you're making to yourself. And remember that this would include anything that pushes your buttons, you know, accusations, insults, rude comments, and so forth. Try to be less sensitive. This is different from hardening your heart. What it is opening up, let it in, and then let it go. If it hurts, acknowledge it, but then let it go. Don't hang on to it. Rinpoche said it's good to ask, quote, why am I aggressive? End quote. To investigate, to look deeply, to get to know this about yourself. Remember, the world isn't against you, that what you're experiencing is the way the world works. This is the way samsara is. It's not perfect. It never will be perfect. There will always be difficult situations, problems, and people. And it's important to remember, too, that in terms of places where we live versus other places in the world, we have an incredible amount of comfort, conveniences, protection, and so on and so forth. It still can be scary. It's still plenty of difficult situations and difficult people. But comparatively, we are in a very good position. So finally, Tonglen can be of great benefit in developing patience, helping us to develop respect for others and patience for others, and understanding the equality of self and other. So finally, the results of practicing patience, or the perfection of patience, is that we become more understanding of others, more loving, more compassionate, kinder. that our peace of mind increases, our mental stability increases. We're less distracted by daily life. We actually can accomplish more in our lives, dharmically or mundanely, because we have less distraction, we're calmer, we're more stable. And a patient person will develop, other people will develop respect for a patient person over time. It won't come overnight, and not everybody will, but many people will be very aware of you being a patient person and will respond accordingly. Finally, by being patient, you will accumulate less negative karma. That anger is extremely destructive of merit. And because it is such a powerful negative emotion, and it can take you to a hell realm in the next life if you are an angry person in this life. So with that, I wish all of you well, and may you become the perfection of patience.